are a lot of good options here, but we have a continuous program here on the main stage. We're going to spend the whole day talking about sustainability and tech for good. We've got another panel coming up now looking at the transition towards a sustainable digital future. It's moderated by an officer from Bitcom's Digitalization and Sustainability Office. Please welcome Nicholas Meyer-Breitkreuz and his panel.
So, thanks, Sarah, and welcome, everyone. We are talking about sustainability, and our panel is titled From Vision to Action, Accelerating the Transition Towards a Sustainable Digital Future. My name is Nicholas Meyer-Breitkreuz. I am the Policy Officer for Digitalization and Sustainability at Bitcom, and I'm really looking forward to spend the next 30 minutes with my three panelists talking about challenges and opportunities in creating a sustainable digital future, but also personal perspectives and motivations, experience, and maybe at the end also the role of policy and regulatory frameworks. And with that, really warm welcome to Adel Al-Saleh, board member Deutsche Telekom and CEO of T-Systems. Dana Aleff, CEO and founder of Circonomit, and last but not least, Lukas Bosch, CEO and co-founder Project bcause. Welcome everyone, great to have you here. Maybe let's start right away. Our panel is titled From Vision to Action, so maybe as an opening questions, you can give us a brief insights into your actions. What do you do? And then, above all, what kind of understanding of sustainability underlies your actions? Maybe Dana, as a founder of a green tech startup, climate startup, do you want to start?
Yes, hello everybody. So what we basically do is we build environmental data infrastructure. So what does that mean? It's equivalent to what we already have on the financial side. You can imagine it's like an environmental data toolbox to really quickly build primary and traceable environmental data sets for products and production lines. And what sustainability is for me, I love the German word about enkelfähig, so to leave a world for the next generation where we can live and work in, and basically to build up an industry that works in the planetary boundaries and not against them. So that's, I think, where we have to make this massive shift in the industry now, and that's really exciting with lots of potential, I think.
Adel, what do you do in the area of sustainability at T-Systems, and how do you define sustainability?
Well, let me start with a definition first. For us, sustainability is about, first of all, getting Deutsche Telekom to be a net zero company, right? And we have goals and milestones when we're going to achieve that. And for us also, as important, is to enable our customers to reach their sustainability goals. So we build solutions and advice and implementations for clients to make sure that they get to their targets of net zero.
And Lukas, you're not from the classical environmental sustainability field. Project bcause is an online platform. What do you do, and what role plays sustainability in your work?
True, Project bcause is not a green tech or specifically in the green space, but basically we're on a mission to improve the UX of using private capital to drive change. Sounds very abstract, but essentially, if you're in a lucky position to have enough private capital that you think you should do something good in this world, you would be surprised by how hard that is if you're not called Bill Gates and have your own foundation. And one part of that is, of course, driving sustainability. So when I would define sustainability, I would much rather give a more abstract definition of something like future-proofing systems. And that means also how do we use capital in this world in a sustainable way that will also drive that change in future generations.
It's always important to understand, if we talk about sustainability, we have several dimensions and not just environmental sustainability. But maybe before we go more deeper into your work, let me ask maybe a broader question. When I think about the interplay of sustainability and digitalization, there we always have this tension between economic growth and environmental goals. And can you explain how do you navigate these tensions, or to put it more blank, do we have to rethink our business models? Yes.
Okay, I'll start and then you support me, please, or with your views. Look, for me, it's actually a little bit different. I see that the core strategy of the company must be grounded in sustainability, or ESG, let's say, right? So we don't look at it anymore as, well, you have a core business model, an economic model for your company, and then you have to think about how do I add sustainability to it? And that is an important bridge to cross, right, as a company, when you look at it. And we crossed that bridge about 3 years ago in Deutsche Telekom and in T-Systems, where we started looking at sustainability as part of our core strategy. So everything we do around thinking of how we build products, how we build services, how do we deploy services, how do we support clients, has sustainability built into it. And you know, the big learning for us from that process is, and Dana will talk about it, I'm sure, is actually sustainability drives better efficiency in the company. And there are numerous examples, right? You know, supply chain optimization from a sustainability angle will give you a better efficiency model as you go forward. So it is really integrated now for us.
And how about Lukas and Dana? I mean, you're really impact-driven, mission-oriented. Do you have to kind of change your model, or has it always been sustainable?
Yeah, thanks for this bridge and efficiency word. I'd add up to this, and I think it's really, everyone is saying, oh, okay, sustainability, and somehow treats it as an extra workload. And I think what it is that we have this amazing potential that, unfortunately, we've built up an industry purely based on finance with so many inefficiencies. And if we now bridge sustainability and finance, that we find solutions that are both good for the economic and environmental side. And I think that's a massive leverage effect we have if we start to understand the root cause effects between environmental and economic target dimensions. And another thing, I think it's more like a philosophical question. If people need growth, but if people need growth to get up every morning and to be motivated and start, I am sure that we need to redefine growth of an entire economy. So not say it's not just, you know, the money, but it's like be sort of the money, something from the social and something from the environmental part. And I think that's just interesting to think about, like, what is growth and how can we like put another mathematical function behind how we define that as an economy.
And customer loyalty and your employees' commitment, and all of that, right?
Lukas, what about you?
Yeah, so we get that question a lot, especially because we do both impact investing and non-profit work in the whole spectrum. And people always ask this question of, well, but so if this is an investment thing, will this also have a market rate return, and how to navigate this? And I always think it's a very weird one-dimensional way of thinking. There is sort of impact, there's profit, or do we need to be somewhere in the middle? I think it's the wrong question to ask in the first place. The first question is, well, what kind of sustainability, what kind of change do we want to drive? And from that, we derive the business models and the regulatory framework, etc. And sometimes that ends up to be very profitable. Sometimes it doesn't. And that's, of course, a tricky thing to navigate. But we do need to ask that question first and not first ask, well, what's our return expectation? And now let's think what we can do with that.
Driving sustainability is always a good point to talk about digitalization and technology. So maybe we go into enablers, but also challenges for digital sustainability from your perspective. So maybe you can give us insights. What role do technologies play in shaping modern, sustainable business models? And where does technology help? But also, what do I need to consider when using digital technology for good in general? Maybe you can give us some insights, Adel.
Well, first of all, there are multiple studies by IMF, by European Central Bank, by non-governmental institutions looking at digitalization impact on sustainability. And they all come up with slightly different numbers, but the direction is very consistent, which is when you digitize, when you go into clouds, you have double-digit improvement in efficiencies of the company at the same time as you're driving sustainability, right? So it's a byproduct of really digitizing the company. And there are many different tools, foundations that you use. I mentioned cloud is one of them. We were all hesitant about going to cloud a few years ago, but now we realize when you look at the efficiency of the cloud, including sovereign clouds, right? Not all in public clouds, it is very clear that we have saved enormous amount of money, and at the same time, we run the technology much more efficient than when we did if every individual customer have their own data centers and they have their own installation of the technology. Tim yesterday talked about software, right? Software being kind of like the oil now, right? So using software to, softwareize your processes, to automate the things that you typically do, inherently drives efficiency with less consumption of technology, less consumption of an energy, less effort on a particular task that gives you more efficiency, and as a result gives you better ESG outcomes as well. So there are many different angles you can look at it, but technology is, for us, we see it as a key enabler of ESG. And not just E, also the S and the G, right, of the ESG components.
I mean, you mentioned Tim yesterday, and he told us digitize, digitize, digitize. So, and you're an IT service provider, but is it always good to digitize everything, or how does responsible digitalization work?
Look, they're always, you have to do it with clear view of what the outcome is, right? And sometimes digitalization gives you the wrong outcomes. And sometimes you realize that you need intervention even in the middle of digitalization. You can't make the process 100% self-sufficient. You can't have a chatbot that handles everything that you do, whether it's in your customer care organization or in your operations, et cetera, et cetera. Certain interventions, certain measures are required, and some of them require, for sure, human interaction and human intervention, if you will. So we don't digitalize blindly. We pick the areas and we spend a lot of time analyzing what is the outcome. What do you really want to achieve at the end of the day? Not just efficiency, but are you making your service better? Are you increasing your customer satisfaction? Are you reducing your errors in your system because you're digitizing the way you do things?
Dana, what do you do? What does Circonomit software solution does?
So basically what we do is not just trying, but doing, help companies to understand what all these environmental target dimensions mean for their operations. And about the question you had before, I think that we as humans couldn't understand what exponential growth meant, so we run into these planetary boundaries, and instead of making the same mistakes to only build an industry on one KPI, which was money, we cannot make the same mistake now just building the same industry just on one sustainability KPI, and that's emissions. Because I'd just like to highlight the topic on water and on raw materials, so all the circular economy topic that's still, even in the politics, just like really not mentioned enough. And what we do is basically have a catalog from different sustainability metrics, so about raw materials, about water, circular economy indicators, so having multi-dimensional environmental target dimension and modeling the root cause effects, how they affect the finance, and to help companies make it easy to understand what this multi-dimensional sustainability means, so that we are not running in the same problems we've done the last decades. So it's a software actually, and basically doing this.
Lukas, what's your view on technology? How do you use it? What do you digitize?
Yeah, I think for us it's a classic case of the technology gives access, and access on two levels. The one thing is simply how do people access, for example, for us, financial instruments? And surprise, surprise, if you're not a multi-billionaire and have your own foundation and have that as sort of a hobby or as a job, you don't have the time after work to then spend hours reading about how now to do something about the environment or some social issue. So you need to do it. So what we try to make as easy as possible is you're on your couch at home, you have your iPad and you build your own foundation, and you can do all of these things. So that's one level of access. And the other level of access is, of course, the information coming from the organizations that are being financed, and that's much more in your direction. And there, without the digitalization, we would have no chance of aggregating this data. I think there's a little asterisk at it that we often observe. The digitalization invites for in an overflow of information with a lack of context or an inability to interpret this data. But it gives you a sense of security. So I think one thing that is very hard for different actors to do is to think about, well, on what level should this information now be used to actually drive decisions? And once the data is there, it's very easy to scale it all the way up to people who actually don't know the context anymore. So that's a little asterisk I usually put there.
Our panel is particularly about accelerating transition. And accelerating always requires overcoming challenges. That's why maybe let's talk about it from your experience. What are the main hurdles and challenges in transitioning into a sustainable digital future? Maybe Dana, can you give us some examples from your customers?
I think everyone of us has to be brave because we build an economy that works really linearly. So we, get things, produce them, and then they are waste, and then we burn them. And the way we have to think now is in circles. So it's if we just do baby steps and try to, make little adjustments in our operations, it's not working. So the biggest hurdle is to be brave and to take a step back and not just say, okay, danger, danger, everyone has now to do the compliant thing, but to understand why are we doing this? We are not doing this for fancy PDF documents, but for understanding how we have to take into account all these constraints that we ignored for so long and rethink it. And I think rethinking operations after they run for decades, it's so hard. And I wish everyone here who's in an industry company just be brave and take a step back and take 1 hour per week to sit down with a blank piece of paper and rethink how we design operations on a strategic and operational level.
Adel, what's your perspective, especially on large companies and organizations?
So I'll give you a perspective from Deutsche Telekom and our customers, large customers that we work with. To me, the first obstacle is getting conviction from the leadership at the top. And give you a little insight in DT, 3-4 years ago, we spent enormous amount of arguments at the board level in DT. What are we going to do about sustainability? And really, there were, initially we thought, it's easy conversation, we all committed to it. It was not easy. Everybody had a different opinion on the management board and how they go for it. So getting leadership alignment is, to me, obstacle number one. Obstacle number two is then creating a strategy. How do you really then go about it and not being afraid? Dana is right. You have to take some steps, right? And you have to step back at the same time while you're taking these steps to think how would you go actually about it on a longer term. And then the last obstacle, and by the way, there's a list that's quite long, is what Dana's company is doing. And that is, how do you create a baseline? How do you actually know and define what is your CO2 footprint today? And let me tell you, that is not easy for large or small companies. There aren't databases available to you that tells you, well, your computer, your server, your storage device, your data center, your source of energy, you add them all up, this is what your emission is. It's not there. You have to look for it. You have to build it. And having easy to access databases that then allow you to build your foundation, your baseline, is a must, right? And that is a big obstacle for companies.
You have touched on it, so how can we transform your experience into really key success factors? Maybe you can give us some insights at the organizational level or in day-to-day operations. What are the key success factors for driving sustainable digital transformation?
Yeah, well, I'm first going to react a little bit to that as well. And I think that baseline question is really important. And we usually, for us, it's slightly different. It's what's the true counterfactual here? And I do think that's a key hurdle we have in both environmental transformation, but also in social impact. And that is, we so often confuse working with impact or with sustainability versus what's the actual impact or the sustainability we create. The easiest example of that is historically, if you want to have a green portfolio for your investment portfolio, and you want it to be net zero, you just kick out all companies that are related to energy, right? But then the question you have to ask yourself is, well, does this change anything about energy production in this world, right? And probably very little. And that question of what would actually happen if we wouldn't do what we are doing right now, that's a much, much harder question. It's often not answered honestly. Both on an individual level, by the way, as an entrepreneur, what do we do and what would happen if we wouldn't do that, but also on a large organization. So I think that's, honesty there is what drives the actual speed. Now on our own operational level, I mean, that's exactly what we try to do. And we're honest with our customers about it. And we are very honest about what we know and what we don't know. And that seems to give a lot of trust, especially when it comes to data. And we say, yeah, here we have data, here we don't. And we show you that transparently. And that seems to create the trust we need.
Dana, how about you?
Yeah, I'd like to add up on this, what you said, to be honest about what we can do and what we can't, because what I'm observing currently is like that everyone tries to make the quick and dirty solution on like trying to get information with like a lack of the data. And what we then do is, because everyone asks us like, how are you different? Like, why are you not the millions emission tool? And I said, okay, so the black box we have about this data that no one understands, we turn that into a scalable white box. So we have to be, and we are 100% transparent and honest, because we're building this traceability on what you said, to say, okay, you have always this couple. So say, okay, that's my number. And that's where the data came from. Is it a primary data source from a shop floor, or is it an aggregated data point from I got wherever from? And to like be honest with your own stakeholders, with your customers, because only if we are like honest on what our decision basis is, only then we can make the right decision and transform the entire industry like everyone lives in, right? And it's not about saving the planet, but saving us on planet Earth. I think that that's the main thing.
Being honest is also a good point. So a success factor that is always reflected to me again and again is effective collaboration and cooperation. And if we talk about sustainability, it often requires really long-term commitment to something. So maybe Adel, can you give us some insights about how do you collaborate with other industry players, with your customers? How does that work?
Well, first of all, when we started our journey, we reached out to our partners and suppliers within our ecosystem to be part of it, right? So, for example, we built a net zero private cloud. We couldn't do it by ourselves, right? We needed to work with Lenovo, we needed to work with VMware, we needed to get them all bought into what we're trying to do. So creating that partnership with your partners is super critical around sustainability. But there's another example I'd like to use, which is involving our customers, advisors in a more systematic way. And the way we do it is we actually have a sustainability advisory board, right? Which we just ran one not too long ago. And we invited hundreds of our customers. And we were amazed the amount of take-up we had, right? So we basically created this advisory board. We then had multiple workshops to pick topics that they want to talk about. And we had, and I'm sorry if I don't mention the company, we had Airbus, we had DPDHL, Mercedes, we had Hugo Boss, all these companies, right, that we typically work with from a client perspective. And they sent their most passionate colleagues to these advisory boards, right? And they came up with tangible dozen of solutions that we were going to go after. One of them, Dana, is an ESG repository for Europe. We should talk about that. How do we create something like that? Another example was, how do you harness the energy from edge computing and reuse it somewhere? So there's like a dozen of these examples that we actually committed with these companies to work on. And that alone creates an ecosystem of collaboration. Those ideas lead to the next ideas and the following ideas. So it works for us in terms of how we get them involved.
Lukas, you're an online platform connecting different stakeholders. How you foster ongoing partnerships?
Yeah, so I think it ties back to one of the earlier questions about, for example, business models. Right? So one of the things is what business model is the right one to serve a certain purpose. And I think what is important, what we focus on is, for example, have a combination of, you might have a startup that gives access to data and makes that accessible, but then you might want to have an NGO that is an independent actor that makes data accessible to other actors. So there's more communication between companies, and the public sector, etc. So one of Our organizations, for example, would do exactly that, Sine Foundation. And now these different business models need to have the right ecosystem to thrive. So that means they need to be connected to the right investors. And I think any entrepreneur here in the room will know you want to have investors that are aligned with your actual mission and the business model you derive from that. So what we try to create is have this pipeline of truly mission-driven investors, and I think that's what's going to allow these organizations on our platform to succeed in the long term.
We have talked about challenges and enablers, also key factors, and now collaboration. Maybe to conclude our discussion, let's take a look at policy and regulatory frameworks. And what are the necessary policy incentives you need for scaling sustainable digital business models, or what do you wish for as entrepreneurs?
Okay, then I start. So I think it's good that we have these frameworks because it shows the urgencies. There's just one thing we are currently observing is that everyone is so busy with this, like trying to make this PDF document. Sorry to highlight this again, but we have to take care that we don't stay on the superficial level, but don't miss the strategic beneath. And I think the same with the politics was not only focusing on emissions, because there's lots of emission, and not to do this same mistake again. So I think it's the same with the companies to take a step back and to understand that it's good to have these policies, but to understand why are we doing this beneath what we then publish.
I will add to what Dana just talked about. Look, I'm actually worried that a lot of the regulatory environments and policies make it actually very difficult for us to progress in some of the new initiatives around sustainability. So I would like to see creative thinking around how do you introduce regulatory environment. Regulations is very important. There's no question. Things like creating regulatory sandboxes for areas where things are still unknown, right? So we can start and we can learn and then we can adjust, right? In order, to do it based on real information. Look, another example is, implement agility in the regulatory environment, right? To be faster, but also to do it in kind of sprints. So beyond the sandbox of flexible environment, but really actually work with the businesses to have more of a sprint environment where we will do one thing. Let's not regulate the entire thing end to end immediately. That takes us a year to come up with a regulation. Let's go into an agile structure where we can actually increment and add to it as we go forward. So those are the things that I would really like to see happen.
Lukas, how about you?
Yeah, actually don't have much to add. I'm very much echoing that. I think we need to be very ambitious on the targets, but creativity in policy, I think that's a wonderful way of framing it. We see it, for example, a lot in, once again, going back to business models. What about companies that want to incorporate sustainability in the very structure of their company, in their ownership and how that's being treated, for example, right? And other countries than Germany, for example, are far ahead in that, and we still don't have any legal solution for that. So I think, yeah, creativity is the buzzword there.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so maybe just I say thank you to all of you, to Adel, to Dana, to Lukas. Thanks for your time, and I'm really looking forward to continue the discussion here at Hub, but also at Bitkom. So warm welcome. And I will hand over to Sarah.